Hey, welcome back. My goal for this video is to show you how to bring Exchange Server 2016 into an Exchange Server 2013 organization. So right now you can see one of my Exchange Server 2013 servers, and I've got the Exchange Admin Center open, which you can see right here. So the first thing that I want to do is just take a look around to familiarize you with the environment that I've set up. So right now I've got the Recipients tab selected, and we're looking at mailboxes. And you can see that I've got about 11 user mailboxes. We have user 1 through user 10 and administrator. I've also created some public folders, and if I click on the public folders tab, you can see those. I've got two mail-enabled public folders, one called HR Forms, one called Press Releases. And incidentally, I have populated some of these things. For example, if I go back to recipients, there is mail within my mailboxes. So when we do a migration later on, we're not just migrating empty mailboxes, we're migrating messages as well. So one more thing that I want to show you is the servers container. So here you can see what my Exchange Server 2013 organization really looks like. You can see that we have two servers. We have one server that's a multi-role server. We've got the mailbox role and the client access server role. And then we've got a separate server that's acting as an edge transport. Now, I'll be the first to admit that this isn't a super elaborate Exchange server setup, but that's okay because all of the principles that I'm going to be showing you in this lesson can be scaled up to larger environments. So with that said, I want to quickly switch over to a PowerPoint deck and talk about what's the first thing that we need to do in order to start bringing Exchange Server 2016 into this organization. So in order to bring Exchange Server 2016 into our organization, one of the things that we're going to need to do is to prepare the Active Directory. Now, if you're a global administrator, you've got rights to the Active Directory, to Exchange, and to whatever else, then you won't have to worry about doing this. When you run Exchange setup, then the Active Directory will be prepared automatically on your behalf. But in a lot of organizations, the Exchange Server Administrator doesn't have access to the Active Directory. So you may need to hand the Active Directory preparation task off to someone else. So that being the case, I'm just going to go ahead and walk through the process of preparing the Active Directory. It certainly won't hurt anything to do things this way, and it's a good idea to know how to do it just in case you ever need it. So preparing the Active Directory consists of 3 steps. The first step is extending the schema, and you can see that what we have to do is run Exchange Server Setup, that's Exchange Server 2016 setup, just to be clear, with the Prepare Schema and the I accept Exchange Server license terms switches. Then, once the schema has been prepared, the next thing that we have to do is to prepare the forest. And we do that by running setup once again. Again, Exchange Server 2016 setup. And we run setup with the /prepareAD switch, the /organization name switch, and you have to specify the name of your existing Exchange Server organization. And then you also specify the I accept Exchange Server license term switch. Now, if you don't know the name of your Exchange server, don't worry. I'll show you in a few minutes how you can get that. And then the last thing that you have to do to prepare the Active Directory is to prepare your domains. And there are 2 different ways of doing this. If you want to prepare a specific domain, then you run Exchange Server 2016 setup.exe/prepare domain, and then the fully qualified domain name of the domain that you want to prepare, and then the I accept Exchange Server license term switch. That works just fine. But if you've got several different domains that you want to prepare, then there is another way of doing it. Microsoft gives you a shortcut. You can run setup.exe/prepare all domains as opposed to prepare domain, and then I accept Exchange Server license terms. So that way you can prepare all of your domains at once rather than having to prepare each domain individually. So now that I've talked about the various steps in preparing your Active Directory, let's switch over to a server and we'll go through this for real. So here we are on the server that will eventually run Exchange Server 2016. So before I just jump right in and begin preparing the Active Directory, I want to take just a second and take a look around. So let me go ahead and close out Server Manager. And the first thing that I want to do is open up the Disk Management console. And I'm opening that by running diskmanagement.msc. And when the Disk Management console opens, you can see that we have 3 volumes created. We have C, that's our operating system volume, of course. And then we have E and F. I'm going to use those later on for the database and the transaction logs. So let me close this out. And then another thing that I want to be sure and point out is that In the previous video, I mentioned that there are a number of prerequisites to installing Exchange Server 2016. There are a lot of pieces that have to be put into place. I've already put those pieces in place just so I wouldn't bore you by making you sit through watching me install a bunch of prerequisite components. So another thing that I've done is if I can go into C drive, I've created an ISO folder, and here I have my Exchange Server installation files. And I've also expanded those. You can see I've got a folder called Exchange Files. And these are all my Exchange Server setup files. Remember, we have to run Exchange Setup to prepare the Active Directory. So I've already put all of that in place. Now, one more thing that we need to do before we prepare the Active Directory is join the Active Directory, because you can't prepare the Active Directory if your server is not a domain member. And Exchange requires Active Directory. It's got a direct dependency on Active Directory. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on the Start button, and I'm going to go to System. And right here you can see the computer name. In this case, I'm calling it E2K16 Migrate. I just chose this name because I'm eventually going to migrate the mailboxes off my Exchange 2013 server over to this server. But you can see that right now, this server is a member of a work group. So we need to change that. So what I'm going to do is click Change Settings, and the computer name tab is pulled up. I'm going to click Change, and I'm going to stick with the computer name that I'm already using, but I'm going to join this to the POSI demo domain. Now, incidentally, before you can join an Active Directory domain, you have to be able to resolve the domain name at the DNS level. So if you haven't already done so, it's a good idea to make sure that your server is provisioned with the correct DNS server. So I'm just going to go into Control Panel, and I'm going to click on Network and Internet, Network and Sharing Center, change adapter settings. Here's my Ethernet adapter. I'm going to right-click on this and go to Properties. And I'm going to go to Internet Protocol version 4 and click Properties. And you can see that my preferred DNS server is set up correctly. So I'm going to cancel out of that. And I'm just going to enter POSI demo as the domain name and click OK. And I'm prompted for a password. So I'm going to give it the domain administrator credentials. And I'm being welcomed into the POSI demo domain. So I'm going to click OK, OK, close this out, and I'm prompted to restart. So I'm going to pause the video for a moment while I restart this server. Welcome back. So I've domain joined my server, and I've logged in using a domain administrator account. Now there's one more thing that we have to do before we can prepare the Active Directory, and that is that we have to install the Active Directory administrative tools. And we do that through Server Manager. So let me pull up Server Manager, and I'm going to go up to Manage and Add Roles and Features, and I'll click Next on the Before You Begin screen, and Next on the Installation Type screen. Server selection looks good, so I'm just going to click Next. We don't have to worry about installing any roles, so I'm going to click Next again. Now we get to the Features screen. Here's where we have to select the feature that we want to install. So I'm going to scroll down here, and you'll notice that we have Remote Server Administration Tools. That's what we need. So I'm going to expand this out, and you can see that there are several subcomponents. And one of those subcomponents is Role Administration Tools. I'm going to expand this out as well. And here we have Active Directory, Directory Services, and Active Directory Lightweight Directory Services tools. That's what we need. So I'm going to select this and click Next. And I'm going to click Install. And the installation process takes just a second to complete. So I'm going to pause the video for one moment. Okay, so the installation is complete, and I received a message saying that a restart is pending on this server and that I have to restart the server to finish the installation. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to restart now. Okay, so let's move forward with preparing our Active Directory, and we'll begin by extending the schema. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on the Start button, and I'm going to choose the Command Prompt Admin option. And that's going to open up an administrative command prompt, which you can see right here. So I'm going to enter CD /, that will take us to the root directory, and then I'm going to do a dir. That's the directory command, so you can see what's on this server. And as I do that, you'll notice that I've got a folder called Exchange Files. This is where all of my Exchange Server system files exist at. Now, this folder may or may not exist on your system. It really depends on where you placed your Exchange system files. If you're installing from a DVD, you'll obviously want to use that instead. This just happens to be the location of the Exchange system files on my server. So I'm going to type cd space Exchange Files, and that will take me into this folder. And if I type dir, I can see the contents of the folder. And you'll notice that we have setup.exe. That's Exchange Server Setup. So I'm going to go ahead and clear the screen just to make this a little bit less cluttered. And now we can move forward with extending the schema. So I'm going to type setup.exe, that's Exchange Server 2016 setup, and I'm going to use the /prepare schema switch, and I'm also going to specify the I accept Exchange Server license terms switch. And I'll press enter, and that should launch Exchange Server 2016 setup. And there's a file copy process that has to complete. You'll see that pop up in just a second. Here it is. And we're also going to go through a prerequisite check in a moment. Now, the prerequisite check does a few different things. First of all, it makes sure that the Active Directory tools are installed on the server, but it also checks the other Exchange Server 2013 machines to make sure that they're running the correct patches. Now, you'll recall from the previous video that my Exchange Server 2013 environment has an Edge server. Now, normally, if you just patch your Edge server, then everything's fine. But here we're actually extending the Active Directory schema, and so that we can eventually bring Exchange Server 2016 into the mix. And because of this, what we're going to run into is a problem in which setup isn't going to recognize that our Edge server has been brought up to date with the latest cumulative update release. So what I actually had to do to get around that problem is to get rid of my Edge subscription and then recreate it. So here you can see we're going into that prerequisite analysis that I was telling you about. And in just a second, that should complete and we should move forward. So you can see that the prerequisite analysis has completed. Now we're configuring Microsoft Exchange Server and we're extending the Active Directory schema. So that process is taking place right now. Now this takes just a moment to complete, so I'm going to pause the video while this completes and we'll pick it up here in just a few minutes. Okay, so our schema has been extended successfully. We can see the completed message. And I'm going to go ahead and clear the screen just so that things will be a little bit less cluttered for the next step. So the next thing that we have to do is to prepare our Active Directory forest. So once again, we're going to run setup, and then we're going to use the /prepare AD switch, and then we're going to specify the organization name switch, and we have to specify the name of our Exchange Server organization. Well, what's the Exchange Server organization name? Well, in case you don't know, there is a way to look it up. So let me switch over to one of my Exchange 2013 servers for a moment, and I'll show you how to determine the organization name. Okay, so here I am on an Exchange Server 2013 machine, and I've got the Exchange Management shell open. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type git-organization config, and then the pipe symbol, and then select identity. And this is going to show me that the identity is Posey. That's the name of my organization. So with that said, I'm going to switch back over to my Exchange Server 2016 machine. So now that we know the organization name, we can fill that in. And then we need the /I accept Exchange Server license terms switch. And I'll press enter. And once again, setup starts. And there are some files that have to be copied. And now setup collects the information that it needs for installation. And then here goes the prerequisite check. And now we begin the configuration process. Now one thing that I do want to point out while we're waiting on this is this text right here. Setup will prepare the organization for Exchange Server 2016 by using setup/prepare AD. No Exchange Server 2010 roles have been detected in this topology. After this operation, you will not be able to install any Exchange Server 2010 roles. So that's not really a problem in this case because we're not dealing with Exchange Server 2010, but if you ever had the intention of bringing an Exchange Server 2010 machine online, you wouldn't be able to do it once you've prepared the environment for Exchange Server 2016. So the preparation process is going to take a couple more minutes to complete, so I'm just going to pause the video for a moment, and we'll pick it up here once the process finishes. Okay, so it looks like the organization preparation has been completed, and it says the Exchange Server setup operation completed successfully, so that's good news. I'm going to go ahead and clear the screen just to reduce the clutter a bit. And now we have to prepare our Active Directory domains. So this process is going to be very similar to what we've already seen. I'm going to type setup.exe and then /prepare all domains. And you'll notice even though I've only got one domain, I'm not going to specify that domain individually. I'm just going to use prepare all domains because that saves me a little bit of typing. And then I have to specify the I accept Exchange Server license term switch, and I'll press enter. And once again, setup launches, and we're copying the required files. And once again, setup collects the information that it's going to need for the installation process. And here goes the prerequisite check, and it completed very quickly. So now the domains are being prepared. As I said before, we only have one domain, but that's okay. And the operation has completed successfully. So everything's good to go. Our Active Directory environment has been prepared. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out, and now we can move forward with installing Exchange Server 2016 into our existing Exchange Server 2013 organization. So now we get to install Exchange Server 2016. So I'm going to go ahead and open up File Explorer, and I'll go to my Exchange Files folder and run Setup. So the first screen that I encounter asks if I want to check for updates. Normally in a production environment, this is something that you would want to do. I'm not going to worry about checking for updates because I checked for updates a few minutes ago while the video was paused. So I'm just going to choose the Don't Check for Updates Right Now option, and I'm going to click Next. And now, of course, there are some files that have to be copied. File copy is completed, and now setup is initializing. And now we're taken into the Microsoft Exchange Server 2016 Setup Wizard. We don't really have to do anything on the introduction screen, so I'm just going to click Next. And now we're taken to a screen that asks us to accept the license agreement. So I'll click the option to accept the terms of the license agreement and click Next. And now Setup asks us whether or not we want to use the recommended settings. As you can see right here, using recommended settings basically just forces Exchange to check online for solutions when encountering errors and to provide usage feedback to Microsoft. I'm not going to worry about using these settings because this is a lab environment. In a production environment, it would ultimately be up to you as to whether or not to use these settings. So I'm going to click Next. And now we're asked to select the roles that we want to install. For this particular server, I'm going to configure this with the Mailbox role. And you'll notice that the management tools were selected by default. It's grayed out, you can barely see it, but that box is selected. And I strongly recommend selecting this checkbox to automatically install Windows Server roles and features that are required to install Exchange Server. So I'm going to select that and click Next. And now we're asked to choose the installation space and the location. So I'm just going to install Exchange to the C drive. The path looks good here, so I'm going to click Next. And Setup asks me if I want to disable malware scanning, which I don't, so I'm going to click Next again. And now there's a prerequisite check that has to happen. And the prerequisite check has passed, but we've received a warning here. And it says MAPI over HTTP, the preferred Outlook desktop client connectivity with Exchange servers is not currently enabled. So this is referring to our Exchange Server 2013 organization. And it says consider enabling it using, and then here's the commandlet right here. Set organization config dash MAPI HTTP enabled $true. So this is what we need to run on our Exchange 2013 server to enable MAPI over HTTP. So I'm going to pause the video for 1 second and do that. Okay, so I've switched over to my Exchange 2013 Mailbox server, and I've opened the Exchange Management shell. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to type set dash organization config and then dash MAPI HTTP enabled, and then we'll set that to $true. And everything looks good here. We don't really receive any sort of output, but we have enabled MAPI over HTTP. So I'm going to pause the video, switch back to my Exchange 2016 server, and we'll continue with the installation process. So here we are back on our Exchange 2016 server. So I'm just going to click Install, and that's going to launch the setup process. And as you can see, there are 14 steps that have to complete, so this takes a little while. So I'm going to pause the video, let this do its thing, and we'll pick it up here once the setup process has completed. Okay, so the setup process has completed successfully, and you'll notice right here that we have a message saying to complete the installation of Exchange Server 2016, reboot the computer. So that's the last thing that we need to do is to click Finish and then reboot our server. So in the next video, I'm going to show you how to go ahead and install an Exchange Server 2016 Edge Transport server.